You ever watch someone think they're smarter than the system, only to destroy themselves in the process? This is how I stayed silent, collected evidence, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. Until our CEO himself pulled my old checklist from the trash can, held it up in front of everyone, and asked one simple question that ended a manager's career in seconds. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about fighting back, it's about letting arrogant people hang themselves with their own rope. My name is Alexis Monroe, and I've been running the operations floor at Alderaan Manufacturing for 12 years. 42 years old, divorced, no kids. This job was my life. Every morning at 5:45 a.m., I'd walk through those steel doors with my leather-bound clipboard, the same one I'd carried since my first day as floor supervisor. That clipboard held the checklist that kept our heavy machinery plant running 6,400 days straight without a major incident. Then Blake Harlow showed up. Picture a 30-year-old in a $200 athletic polo and designer jeans walking onto a factory floor where the average worker has grease permanently embedded under their fingernails. Fresh MBA, zero manufacturing experience, hired as our new operations manager because he'd revolutionized workflows at some tech startup that made meditation apps. The kind of guy who says synergy unironically and thinks a hard day's work means his MacBook battery died during a Zoom call. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. I was running through my morning checklist with the crew. Hydraulic pressure readings, belt tension specs, coolant levels. When Blake's voice cut through the mechanical hum of the plant. "Is that seriously paper?" He plucked the clipboard from my hands, holding it up like evidence at a trial. Alexis, Alexis, Alexis. This is exactly the kind of dinosaur thinking that's holding Alderaan back. The floor went silent. 23 workers stopped what they were doing. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the distant drip of condensation from the overhead pipes. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. "This checklist," I said carefully, "has prevented every major mechanical failure for the past." "The past," Blake interrupted, waving the clipboard dramatically, "is exactly where this belongs." He walked over to the break room trash can, the big gray industrial one we emptied twice a shift, and dropped my clipboard in with a theatrical thud. The sound echoed across the concrete floor like a judge's gavel. "From now on, we're going digital. I've already uploaded our new inspection protocol to WorkPing. It's intuitive, streamlined, and," he paused for effect, "actually designed for the 21st century." Marcus, one of my senior technicians, shifted uncomfortably. Janet from quality control wouldn't meet my eyes. They all knew what that clipboard represented. Every near miss we'd caught. Every disaster we'd prevented. Every worker who'd gone home safe because we'd spotted a hairline crack or heard a bearing starting to fail. Blake pulled out his phone, swiping with the confidence of someone who'd never had a hydraulic line explode in their face. "See? Everything you need is right here. Real-time updates, cloud storage, automatic reports to corporate. No more killing trees for paranoid note-taking." I could have fought back, could have told him about the time that checklist caught a pressure valve failure that would have taken out half the floor. Could have mentioned that paranoid note-taking had saved the company $3 million in prevented downtime last year alone. Could have explained that Wi-Fi doesn't work so well when you're inside the belly of a 10-ton industrial press. But I didn't. I just looked at that trash can, at my clipboard sticking up between a half-eaten sandwich and yesterday's coffee grounds. And I smiled. "Of course, Mr. Harlow, digital it is." The crew exchanged glances. They knew that smile. It was the same one I'd worn when the previous manager tried to cut the maintenance budget. He'd lasted 6 weeks. Blake mistook their silence for acceptance, my compliance for submission. "Excellent. See how easy progress can be when we let go of our security blankets. Meeting's over, people. Let's get back to work. The modern way." As everyone dispersed, I made a mental note of the date and time. Then I waited until Blake strutted back to his glass-walled office before walking over to the trash can. I didn't retrieve the clipboard, not yet. But I memorized exactly where it was, buried under the garbage of a typical Tuesday morning. Because I knew something Blake didn't. In manufacturing, paper trails aren't just about nostalgia. They're about survival. And when you throw away 12 years of perfected safety protocols to replace them with an app designed by someone who thinks industrial accident means dropping your laptop, you're not innovating. You're starting a countdown. Blake's revolution rolled out like a Silicon Valley fever dream, crashing into industrial reality. Within 48 hours, every worker had WorkPing downloaded on their personal phones. Company devices were coming soon, Blake assured us, though we all knew that meant never. The app looked like Instagram had a baby with a safety manual, all pastel colors and emoji reactions where critical measurements should be. Just tap the happy face if everything looks good, Blake demonstrated during a mandatory training session, his enthusiasm inversely proportional to everyone's will to live. Yellow face for concerns, red face for issues. It's that simple. Simple, right? Because a cartoon frown was definitely going to convey that the main compressor was running 15 degrees hotter than specifications. The morning inspections became a joke. Instead of systematic checks with precise measurements, workers were now expected to share their feelings about equipment status in the app's feed. I watched Tommy, a 20-year veteran who could diagnose a bearing failure by sound alone, struggle to type "vibes feel off" into his cracked phone screen while wearing work gloves. Alexis, your compliance rate is only 47%. Blake cornered me on Thursday, iPad in hand like a weapon. You're not engaging with the platform. I need to see at least 5 status updates per shift. I'm busy actually checking the equipment, I replied, noting how the number 3 conveyor belt had developed a subtle wobble, something that would never make it into an emoji report. That's old thinking, he said, actually putting his hand on my shoulder like we were buddies. Trust the system. The app aggregates everyone's input and uses predictive analytics to identify issues before they happen. Predictive analytics. The man couldn't predict that standing under a ceiling-mounted crane was dangerous, but sure, his app would magically prevent mechanical failures. I started documenting everything the new system missed. The air compressor that nobody reported because the app crashed whenever you tried to upload photos. The hydraulic fluid leak that got a happy face because the worker didn't know what hydraulic fluid was supposed to look like. The grinding noise from the main press that couldn't be captured in WorkPing's Vibe Check feature. Why are you always writing things down? Blake asked one morning, catching me with my notebook. A small moleskin I'd started carrying since my clipboard's funeral. Just personal notes, I said. Helps me remember. Well, stop. It's making others think you don't trust the system. He actually tried to take my notebook. I pulled it back. Is personal property not allowed anymore? His jaw tightened. Don't be dramatic. I'm trying to build a culture of innovation here, and your resistance is becoming problematic. That afternoon, he sent an email to HR, CCing me. Concerns about team member adaptability and possible insubordination. Recommend performance review. I forwarded it to my personal email, along with the 17 safety warnings I'd submitted through WorkPing that had been marked resolved without any actual resolution. The temperature anomaly in the cooling system, resolved. The unusual vibration in the main shaft, resolved. The fact that we'd skipped 3 scheduled maintenance windows because the app didn't have a maintenance scheduling feature, somehow also resolved. You worry too much, Sandra from assembly told me during lunch. Maybe Blake's right. Maybe we've been too paranoid all these years. I pointed to the wall where a photo hung, the last major accident 8 years ago, before my checklist system. A burst steam pipe had sent 3 people to the hospital. Paranoia is just another word for experience, Sandra. By Friday, even the most optimistic workers were nervous. The plant sounded different, little irregularities that anyone who'd been there long enough could feel in their bones. The rhythm was off. Machines that should hum were buzzing. Joints that should be silent were whispering. But according to WorkPing, we'd had our best week ever. Blake actually brought in donuts to celebrate our 100% digital compliance rate. He stood there in the break room, grinning like he'd cured cancer, while machines around us sent out distress signals in frequencies only those of us who spoke their language could hear. Isn't this amazing? He asked the room. No paper waste, real-time data. And look, he showed his phone screen. Corporate loves our efficiency metrics. Marcus caught my eye and subtly pointed toward the main floor. Through the break room window, I could see maintenance scrambling to deal with something on line 2, something that hadn't made it into the morning's cheerful emoji parade. I bit into a donut and smiled. Amazing, Blake. Absolutely revolutionary. He beamed, missing the sarcasm completely. See? I knew you'd come around, Alexis. Innovation always wins. I nodded, adding another note to my growing collection. Day 4. Blake declares victory while line 2 develops critical steam pressure variance. No report filed in system. Maintenance responding without work order. Blake bringing donuts. Innovation always wins, he'd said. But in my experience, physics doesn't care about your innovation. And gravity always gets the last word. The beauty of working nights and weekends for 12 years is that you know exactly which security cameras work and which have been pending repair since 2019. You know that the IT department goes home at 5, that the cloud backup runs at midnight, and that Blake never ever checks the actual floor after his 4 p.m. leadership visibility walk. So I became a ghost with a smartphone. Every evening after my shift, I'd spend an extra hour documenting what work ping missed. Photos time-stamped and geotagged. Videos of sounds that shouldn't exist. The wheeze of compressor 3, the skip in the conveyor motor, the rattle that had developed in the overhead crane. I uploaded everything to my personal cloud, organized by date, equipment ID, and severity level. I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was building a parallel universe of data, the real story of what was happening at Alderaan Manufacturing. Line 7 bearing temperature. 7 degrees spout course, 32 degrees above spec. No work ping report filed. Click. Upload. Hydraulic reservoir showing metal shavings in filter. Maintenance marked happy face in app. Click. Upload. Emergency shutoff valve sticking. 3. 7-second delay on test. Click. Upload. The trick was being invisible about it. I'd learned from watching Blake that the best saboteurs always smile. So I smiled. I submitted my required 5 work ping updates per shift, all happy faces and enthusiastic comments. Great energy on the floor today, I'd type, while documenting a crack in the main support beam that had grown 2 inches since Tuesday. Marcus knew something was up. You're awfully cheerful lately, he said one morning, watching me give Blake a thumbs up as he walked by. Just embracing innovation, I replied, then quietly showed him my phone. That's from last night, see the leak? His face went pale. That's the main coolant line. Yep. Reported it in work ping 3 times. Got automatically resolved each time because the AI thinks coolant and cooling are different categories. Jesus Christ, Alexis! Don't worry, I said, sliding my phone back in my pocket. I'm keeping track. The close calls started the following week. A belt snapped on line 4, whipping past Janet's head so close it took some of her hair with it. The work ping report? Minor equipment adjustment needed. A pressure gauge exploded in shower of glass and steam. The official record? Gauge replacement completed. I documented everything, every incident, every near miss, every cheerful emoji that masked a potential catastrophe. But more importantly, I saved every email, every message, every single time I tried to report these issues through proper channels. Alexis, need to see you. Blake called from his office one Wednesday afternoon. I found him with the HR representative, Karen, a woman who wore her lack of factory floor experience like a designer handbag. We're concerned about your attitude, Karen started, her voice dripping with manufactured empathy. Blake feels you're undermining the new system. How so? I asked, pulling out my phone to record the conversation, legally, since we were in a one-party consent state. Not that they knew I knew that. You've been seen taking photos, Blake said, making notes. It's creating a negative environment. I'm documenting my work. Is that against company policy? Karen shuffled papers. Well, no. But... And I've submitted 47 safety concerns through WorkPing in the past 2 weeks. all marked resolved without action. Is there a policy against maintaining personal records of safety issues? Blake's face reddened. You're trying to make the system look bad. The system is making itself look bad. I'm just keeping track of how bad. This is exactly the resistance to change we're talking about, Karen interjected. Perhaps you'd benefit from our transition assistance program? Transition assistance, corporate speak for quit or will make your life hell until you do. I'll think about it, I said, standing up. Oh, Blake? You might want to check the pressure readings on tank 2. The work ping happy face is covering a 17% overpressure situation. I left them scrambling for their phones. That night, I compiled everything into a master file. 800 photos, 93 videos, 200 pages of documentation. Every cheerful work ping report paired with the actual danger it concealed. Every warning I'd submitted. Every email where Blake dismissed concerns. Every message where he'd explicitly told workers to stop overthinking and trust the system. I encrypted it all, backed it up to 3 different cloud services, and emailed a copy to my personal lawyer, just in case. Then I created one more document, a timeline showing the correlation between Blake's improvements and the degradation of safety metrics. A beautiful, terrifying graph that showed exactly how fast we were accelerating toward disaster. Tommy found me in the parking lot that night, looking worried. Alexis, something's going to break soon. We can all feel it. I know, I said, looking back at the plant. Even from outside, you could hear it, the subtle wrongness in the rhythm, like a heart developing an arrhythmia. What are you going to do? I thought about my files, my evidence, my careful documentation of Blake's dangerous incompetence. What I've always done, Tommy, my job. But Blake's about to learn the difference between disrupting an app-based marketplace and disrupting the laws of physics, I said. One gives you a TED Talk, the other gives you a OSHA investigation. Tommy laughed nervously. You've got a plan, don't you? I smiled. I've got better than a plan. I've got receipts. The sound started on a Monday morning, a rhythmic chirping from the main cooling line, like a cricket trapped in a metal tube. Anyone who'd worked with industrial cooling systems knew that sound. It meant the internal support brackets were loosening, allowing the pipe to vibrate against its housing. Give it a week, maybe 2. And that chirp would become a scream, followed by a rupture that could flood the entire floor with superheated coolant. I stood next to the pipe during the morning inspection, listening to its distress call while Blake conducted his innovation stand-up 15 feet away. Remember, team, we're not looking for problems, he announced to the gathered workers. We're looking for opportunities to optimize. The pipe chirped louder, as if in protest. I pulled out my phone, recorded 20 seconds of clear audio, then typed up a formal safety alert. Critical cooling line showing signs of internal bracket failure. Recommend immediate shutdown for inspection. Estimated repair time, 4 hours. Estimated cost of failure, $2.4 million plus potential casualties. I submitted it through WorkPing, CC'd it via email to Blake, the safety department, and even Lisa Patterson, the regional manager who'd been my ally back when competence mattered more than buzzwords. Blake's response came within minutes. Alexis, per our previous discussion, please refrain from catastrophizing. The system shows all green lights. The chirping grew worse throughout the week. By Wednesday, it had developed a rattle. By Thursday, there was visible vibration. Other workers started avoiding that section of the floor, taking longer routes to avoid walking under the pipe. Nobody said anything in WorkPing, though. They'd learned that reporting problems only got you labeled as resistant to change. I documented everything. The increasing amplitude of vibration. The temperature spikes that lasted just long enough to damage seals, but not long enough to trigger the app's alerts. The way Blake literally walked past the pipe during his visibility walks. The sound so obvious that he had to be actively ignoring it. Thursday afternoon. I tried one more time. I found Blake in his office, feet up on his desk, practicing his presentation for next week's Corporate Innovation Summit. Blake, that cooling line is going to fail. When it does, It'll shut down the entire plant for at least 3 days. Minimum. He didn't even look up from his laptop. Alexis, I've reviewed your concerns, and frankly, they seem to stem from an inability to trust automated systems. The AI monitoring shows everything within acceptable parameters. The AI doesn't have ears. That pipe sounds like it's dying. Machines make noise. That's what they do. He finally looked at me, his expression condescending. You know what your problem is? You're so used to finding problems that you can't accept when things are actually working. I pulled out my phone and played the recording. The chirp rattle wheeze filled his office. That's the sound of a pre-failure condition, I said. I've heard it 3 times in my career. Every time ended with nothing, Blake interrupted. Because you prevented it, right? Classic survivor bias. You think every noise is a disaster because you've built your entire identity around being the person who prevents disasters. But maybe, just maybe, those disasters were never going to happen. The arrogance was breathtaking. Here was a man who'd been in manufacturing for 6 weeks, telling someone with 2 decades of experience that they were imagining things. I'm filing a formal safety concern with corporate, I said. His expression hardened. You do that, and I'll file a formal complaint about your insubordination. I've already discussed your resistance with HR. Karen agrees that your inability to adapt is becoming a liability. A liability, I repeated. Look, I'm trying to help you here. He put on his fake concerned face. Take the weekend. Think about whether you really want to die on this hill. The company is moving forward with or without you. I left his office and went straight to the floor. The pipe was worse. The vibration had increased to the point where you could see ripples in the puddles of condensation beneath it. I took more video, more photos, adding them to my ever-growing archive. Marcus found me there. It's going to go, isn't it? Soon, I confirmed. Maybe tomorrow, definitely by Monday. Should we shut it down ourselves? Fake a power issue or something? I thought about it. We could prevent the disaster, save the company millions, possibly save lives. But then Blake would claim victory. His system would have worked, and he'd use it as evidence to roll out WorkPing to every Alderaan facility in the country. No, I said finally. We follow protocol. We've reported it through proper channels. We've documented everything. Now we wait. That's cold, Alexis. No, it's necessary. Sometimes the only way to prove a safety system is broken is to let it fail safely. I looked at the evacuation routes, the emergency shutoffs, the containment systems. When it goes, hit the emergency stop immediately. Get everyone clear of this section. The automatic containment should handle the rest, but the plant will be down for days. Marcus nodded slowly. And Blake? Blake's about to learn why we had paper checklists for 60 years before he showed up with his app. That night, I sent one final email to Lisa Patterson, the regional manager. I attached 30 days of documentation, the audio recordings, the deterioration timeline, and a simple note. When this fails, you need to know it was preventable, every step of the way. Her response came at 11 p.m. Understood. Keep your phone on this weekend. I sat in my apartment, looking at my old clipboard that I'd retrieved from the trash that first night, cleaned off, and mounted on my wall like a trophy. Tomorrow or Monday. Blake's digital revolution would meet industrial reality. And I had the receipts to prove exactly who was responsible. It happened at 7:43 a.m. on Monday morning. I was stationed at the emergency control panel, having arrived an hour early. Marcus was by the main shutoff. Janet had quietly positioned herself near the evacuation alarm. We didn't speak, didn't coordinate officially, we just knew. The way a body knows it's about to be sick. The chirp had become a shriek over the weekend. When the morning shift started, even Blake noticed it, though he stood in the middle of the floor typing furiously into WorkPing, probably trying to find an emoji for everything's still fine. Then the shriek stopped. In my experience, sudden silence is worse than any alarm. It means something has finally given way. The pipe burst with a sound like God cracking his knuckles. A jet of superheated coolant shot sideways, hitting the concrete wall with enough force to crack it, Steam exploded upward, turning the entire west section into a toxic sauna. The pressure wave knocked over 2 workers who were thankfully just far enough away to avoid the spray. Marcus hit the emergency stop. I slammed the containment protocol button. Janet pulled the evacuation alarm. Within seconds, the mechanical symphony of Alderaan manufacturing became a cacophony of sirens, hissing steam, and shouting voices. Everyone out now, I yelled, even though the workers were already moving. We drilled this. They knew the routes. Blake stood frozen in the middle of it all, his phone still in his hand, mouth open as he watched his digital revolution drown in analog chaos. A geyser of coolant was creating a toxic rainbow in the emergency lights, and he was trying to document it with work ping. Blake, move! I grabbed his arm and yanked him toward the exit. The automatic containment systems kicked in, overhead sprinklers deployed, emergency drains opened, ventilation went to maximum. But the pipe kept hemorrhaging, coolant pooling and spreading across the floor like fluorescent green blood. We made it to the evacuation point where workers were doing head count, everyone present, no injuries beyond some bruises from the rush to exit, but behind us, through the reinforced glass windows, we could see the disaster unfolding. Millions of dollars of equipment sitting in expanding pools of corrosive coolant, electronics sparking and dying. The main conveyor system grinding to a halt as fluid invaded its mechanisms. Blake finally found his voice. This isn't possible. The system said everything was fine. The system doesn't have ears, I replied, pulling out my phone to call the hazmat team. Within 15 minutes, the parking lot was full of emergency vehicles, OSHA representatives, environmental protection, corporate safety, and walking through them all like Moses parting the Red Sea. Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Alderaan Manufacturing, a man who hadn't visited our facility in 2 years. Jonathan Pierce was the kind of CEO who'd started as a floor worker 40 years ago. Tall, silver-haired, with hands that still bore scars from his days running a press. He surveyed the chaos through the windows, his expression unreadable. "Who's the floor supervisor?" he asked the assembled group. "I am." I stepped forward. "And the operations manager." Blake raised a trembling hand. "Conference room, both of you. Now." The conference room was eerily quiet compared to the chaos outside. Jonathan sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled, while Blake attempted to explain. It was a perfect storm of unforeseen circumstances. Blake stammered. The predictive analytics should have caught it, but there must have been a sensor malfunction, or maybe user error in the reporting. "Stop," Jonathan said quietly. "Ms. Monroe, when did you first notice signs of failure in that cooling line?" "Monday of last week," I replied. The internal brackets were failing, classic pre-rupture signature. "And you reported this?" I pulled out my phone, showing him the timestamps. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, through work ping, email, and verbally to Mr. Harlow. Jonathan turned to Blake. "Is this true?" "She's always reporting things, every little sound, every minor variance. The system is designed to filter out noise and focus on real issues." "A pipe just exploded in my factory," Jonathan interrupted. "Was that not real enough for you?" Blake's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Jonathan pulled out his own phone and made a call. "Lisa? Yes, I'm here. Bring the files." He hung up and looked at me. "Ms. Patterson shared your documentation with me last night. I drove down from Chicago to see for myself." The door opened, and Lisa Patterson entered carrying a thick folder and an iPad. She nodded to me, a small acknowledgement that felt like vindication. "Mr. Harlow," Jonathan continued, "are you familiar with the phrase normalization of deviance?" Blake shook his head. "It's when organizations gradually accept lower standards until disaster becomes inevitable. Your work ping system didn't filter out noise. It normalized danger." He pulled out a paper from Lisa's folder. "This is a checklist. Ms. Monroe's checklist, specifically. The one you threw in the trash 6 weeks ago." Blake went pale. 60 years, Jonathan said, his voice gaining edge. 60 years of institutional knowledge condensed into paper and procedure. And you threw it away for an app that turns catastrophic failure into smiley faces. Sir, I was brought in to modernize. You were brought in to improve efficiency without compromising safety. Instead, you compromise safety while destroying efficiency. The plant will be down for at least a week. The cleanup alone will cost $2 million. The equipment damage, another $3 million. Potential EPA fines, unknown. OSHA investigations, guaranteed. Jonathan stood up, walked to the window overlooking the floor where hazmat crews were now working. But worse than all of that, he said, you ignored 47 safety warnings from an employee with 12 years of spotless service. You created a culture where workers were afraid to report dangers. You almost got people killed because you thought Silicon Valley solutions could override the laws of physics. He turned back to us. Mr. Harlow, you're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. You'll be hearing from our legal department about potential criminal negligence charges. Blake stood up on shaky legs. You can't. I'll sue for wrongful termination. Please do, Jonathan replied calmly. Discovery will be fascinating. Security appeared at the door. Blake looked at me, his face a mix of rage and disbelief, then followed them out. Jonathan sat back down, suddenly looking tired. Ms. Monroe, I owe you an apology. You did everything right, and the system failed you. The system didn't fail, I corrected. It was replaced with something that couldn't succeed. He smiled grimly. Well put, I'll need you to manage the recovery operation. Full authority, overtime approved, whatever you need. I'll need my checklist back, I said. Where is it? Still in the trash, technically. Blake never emptied it after that first day. Jonathan actually laughed, a short, sharp bark. Then let's go get it. And Ms. Monroe? That checklist is getting laminated and mounted in the lobby. Some things don't need disrupting. The recovery was in full swing when Jonathan Pierce returned to the floor 3 hours later. Hazmat teams worked in rotating shifts, the sound of industrial vacuums competing with ventilation fans running at maximum capacity. The entire west section looked like a crime scene wrapped in yellow tape and plastic sheeting. I was coordinating with the cleanup chief when Jonathan approached, his expensive suit incongruous against the industrial disaster backdrop. Behind him trailed 2 corporate executives I didn't recognize and Lisa Patterson, who was documenting everything on her tablet. Walk me through exactly what happened, Jonathan said, but his tone suggested he wanted this for the executive's benefit, not his own. I led them to the break room, its windows offering a clear view of the disaster zone. The trash can still sat in the corner, the same one Blake had used for his theatrical demonstration 6 weeks ago. The failure started here, I began, but Jonathan held up his hand. No, he said, walking over to the trash can. The failure started here. He reached into the bin, past fresh coffee grounds and someone's half-eaten breakfast burrito, and pulled out my clipboard. It was stained, crumpled, but intact. The laminated checklist still attached, barely readable under a smear of what looked like ketchup. Gentlemen, Jonathan addressed the executives, holding up the clipboard like evidence in a courtroom. This is what modern leadership looks like to some people, taking decades of proven procedure and literally throwing it in the garbage. One of the executives, a younger man with the kind of haircut that cost more than most people's shoes, shifted uncomfortably. Sir, with all due respect, digitalization is essential for competitive... Stop, Jonathan commanded. He wiped the clipboard with a paper towel, revealing the checklist beneath. Ms. Monroe, read item 23. I didn't need to look. Cooling system inspection, check for unusual sounds, vibrations, or temperature variance. Document all anomalies. Pre-failure conditions often present as rhythmic chirping or grinding. Minimum inspection time, 5 minutes per line. 5 minutes, Jonathan repeated. Mr. Harlow's app allocated 30 seconds for the entire cooling system. one emoji to represent 40,000 pounds of pressure running through aging pipes. The second executive, older and clearly more experienced, winced. The insurance implications alone. 7 million in estimated damages so far, Lisa interjected, reading from her tablet. OSHA has opened a formal investigation. The EPA is considering fines for the coolant contamination. 3 workers are filing workplace safety complaints. Jonathan set the clipboard on the table with deliberate care. But here's the real kicker. Ms. Monroe documented every warning, every sign, every ignored report. She has recordings, timestamps, email chains. She built an airtight case that we willfully ignored critical safety protocols. The younger executive went pale. That makes us liable for everything, Jonathan finished. Unless we demonstrate that this was the action of a rogue manager operating outside company guidelines, which, fortunately, it was. He turned to me. Ms. Monroe, I need you to compile everything, every piece of documentation, every warning you issued, every time Mr. Harlow dismissed safety concerns. Legal will need it all. Already done, I said, pulling out a USB drive I'd been carrying for 3 weeks. Chronologically organized, cross-referenced, and backed up in triplicate. Jonathan actually smiled. Of course it is. He turned back to the executives. This is what competence looks like. Gentlemen, not apps, not disruption, not innovation theater, just someone who knows their job and does it properly. The older executive cleared his throat. What about the digitalization initiative? Corporate was expecting. Corporate can expect whatever they want, Jonathan interrupted. But this plant runs on physics, not expectations. We'll digitize what makes sense: inventory, scheduling, communications. But safety? Safety stays analog. Paper doesn't crash. Clipboards don't need updates. And experience doesn't have a USB port. He picked up the clipboard again, this time with something approaching reverence. Mr. Stevens, he addressed the younger executive. You were Blake's advocate, weren't you? Pushed for his hiring. Stevens nodded reluctantly. Then you'll appreciate the lesson here. I started on a floor like this one, checking items off a list just like this. Every checkmark was a promise that someone would go home safe. Blake saw inefficiency where he should have seen insurance. He saw outdated where he should have seen proven. Jonathan walked to the window, looking out at the ongoing cleanup. In 6 hours, this news will hit the trade publications. By tomorrow, our stock will drop 3 points. By Thursday, will be a case study in every business school's what not to do curriculum. Sir, Stevens ventured, if we frame this as an isolated incident, we don't frame anything. Jonathan cut him off. We own it. We admit a hiring mistake. We showcase our response, and we put Ms. Monroe front and center as the employee who tried to prevent this. We're not the company that ignored safety warnings. We're the company that had an employee brave enough to document them. He turned to me. I'm promoting you to Plant Safety Director, new position, reporting directly to me, not through operations. Your first task is to review every innovation implemented in the last year. If it compromises safety, it goes. And the checklist? I asked. Jonathan held it up one more time, ketchup stain and all. This gets professionally preserved and mounted in the corporate boardroom. With a plaque, excellence is not disruption, excellence is consistency, properly applied. The younger executive looked confused. You're making a shrine out of a dirty clipboard? No, Jonathan replied, handing it to me with unexpected ceremony. I'm making a statement that sometimes the best solution is the one that already works. That wisdom isn't always wearing a polo shirt and talking about synergy, and that the person willing to dig through literal garbage to save lives is worth more than a dozen MBAs who've never heard a pipe scream. He checked his watch. Press conference in an hour, Ms. Monroe. You'll stand with me. Bring the clipboard. Let everyone see what we threw away and what we're smart enough to value now. As the executives filed out, Lisa lingered behind. He's planning to use this as a complete reversal of the digital-first initiative, she said quietly. Blake was just the beginning. Stevens and his entire innovation team will be gone by Friday. I looked at the clipboard in my hands, still damp from its time in the trash. All because Blake couldn't stand the sight of paper. No, Lisa corrected. All because you knew the difference between innovation and insanity. And you kept the receipts. The press conference was held in the main corporate conference room, hastily transformed into a media briefing area. 20 reporters, 3 news cameras, and enough skepticism to fill a stadium. Jonathan stood at the podium with the confidence of someone who'd survived worse, while I stood to his right, holding the stained clipboard like a battle standard. Ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan began, Alderaan Manufacturing experienced a preventable industrial accident this morning. I say preventable because our veteran staff identified the danger days in advance. The failure was not in detection, it was in listening. A reporter's hand shot up. Mr. Pierce, are you confirming that management ignored safety warnings? I'm confirming that a single manager, operating outside company safety protocols, implemented an experimental system that suppressed critical warnings. That manager has been terminated, and potential criminal charges are being evaluated. The room erupted in questions. Jonathan raised his hand for silence, then did something unexpected. He stepped aside and gestured to me. This is Alexis Monroe, our new plant safety director. She documented every warning, every dismissed concern, every sign of impending failure. Ms. Monroe, please tell them about the checklist. I stepped to the podium, lifting the clipboard for all to see. Camera flashes exploded like strobes. This checklist, I began, my voice steady despite the attention, represented 60 years of institutional knowledge. Every line item was written in someone's blood, sweat, or near miss. 6 weeks ago, it was thrown in the trash and replaced with an app that turned critical safety data into emoji reactions. Why didn't you retrieve it immediately? A reporter called out. Because sometimes, I replied, you need to let people fail visibly to prevent invisible disasters elsewhere. If I'd quietly fixed every problem, Mr. Harlow's system would have been deemed a success and rolled out to 12 other facilities. The younger reporter from the Tribune leaned forward. You're saying you let a pipe explode to prove a point? I'm saying I followed the new protocols exactly as implemented. I reported through the required channels. I documented everything. The system failed, not the people trying to work within it. Jonathan returned to the podium. Let me be crystal clear. Ms. Monroe prevented casualties. Her positioning of emergency response teams, despite being told to stop catastrophizing, meant everyone evacuated safely. She turned what could have been a tragedy into merely an expensive lesson. Stevens, the executive who'd backed Blake, stood in the corner, his face the color of spoiled milk. He was typing furiously on his phone, probably updating his resume. Mr. Pierce, another reporter pressed. Workping's parent company claims their system has been successfully implemented in over 200 facilities. Are you suggesting the technology itself is flawed? Jonathan's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I'm suggesting that replacing human expertise with algorithmic interpretation is like replacing a smoke detector with a phone app that asks how you feel about fire. Technology should enhance judgment, not replace it. He picked up a printed email from the podium, one of mine, I realized. 5 days ago, Ms. Monroe wrote, and I quote, the cooling line is exhibiting pre-failure symptoms consistent with bracket collapse. Estimated time to critical failure, 72-96 hours. The Workping system classified this as sentiment, negative, and auto-archived it. The room went silent except for the scratch of pens and the whir of cameras. How much will this cost, Alderaan? Someone asked. 7 to 10 million in direct costs. But the real cost? Jonathan gestured to me. The real cost would have been losing employees like Ms. Monroe, who choose safety over metrics, reality over rhetoric. After the conference, as reporters dispersed to file their stories, Jonathan found me in my new office, Blake's former glass cube. though I'd already started moving in metal filing cabinets to replace his meditation cushions. That was well handled, he said, sitting on the edge of the desk. The board is spooked but supportive. They're giving me carte blanche to restructure safety protocols company-wide. And Stevens? I asked, looking through the window at him cleaning out his desk. Resigned. Along with 3 other innovation consultants who suddenly remembered they had opportunities elsewhere. Jonathan picked up the clipboard from my desk, studying it like an artifact. You know, when I started here, my supervisor had one just like this. Betty Rodriguez. Toughest woman I ever met, she used to say. Jonathan, paper doesn't lie, it doesn't need batteries, and it doesn't care about your feelings. Sounds like someone I would have liked. You would have. He set the clipboard down carefully. She also said something else. The best revenge against bad management isn't watching them fail. It's being there to clean up their mess, because that's when everyone sees who really runs this place. I thought about Blake, probably at home now, updating his LinkedIn to exclude the last 6 weeks. He'll land somewhere else. They always do. Probably. But hiring managers Google names now. First result for Blake Harlow will be manager whose emoji system caused $10 million industrial accident. Through the window, workers were returning to the undamaged sections, preparing for limited operations to resume. Marcus gave me a thumbs up. A real one, not an emoji. Janet was showing new temporary workers the evacuation routes. Tommy was explaining to a group of corporate observers why we check things with our eyes and ears, not just sensors. The checklist, Jonathan said suddenly. I want you to modernize it, not digitize, modernize. Update procedures, add new equipment protocols, incorporate lessons learned, but keep it physical, keep it real. Already started, I said, showing him my draft. Version 2.0. Every line item traceable to an incident. Every procedure backed by data. But still paper. Still requiring human verification. Good. Have it ready by Monday. We're making it the standard across all facilities. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Alexis? That USB drive of documentation you compiled? Legal says it's the most comprehensive negligence case they've ever seen. Blake's lawyer called begging for a settlement. We're declining. This goes to court, and your documentation goes public. After he left, I sat alone in what used to be Blake's office, surrounded by the evidence of his digital revolution, abandoned tablets, work ping promotional posters, a move fast and break things motto he'd hung on the wall. I took that one down first. In manufacturing, breaking things isn't innovation, it's just broken. The plant reopened fully 2 weeks later. I stood in the middle of the production floor at 5:45 a.m., holding my new clipboard, steel reinforced with waterproof pages, a small upgrade I'd allowed myself. The morning shift gathered around, their faces showing a mixture of relief and respect that hadn't been there before. Standard inspection protocol, I announced, my voice carrying across the floor. Visual, auditory, and manual verification. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Trust your experience, not an algorithm. The workers dispersed to their stations, and I began my rounds. Every gauge checked, every sound evaluated, every vibration assessed. Real data, real observations, real accountability. At the cooling line, the new one, installed at extraordinary expense, I stopped and listened. A perfect, steady hum. Marcus joined me, both of us unconsciously holding our breath. Sounds healthy, he said. For now, I replied, making a note. Check bearing temperature at noon. If it varies by more than 2 degrees, we investigate. Old school, Marcus grinned. Proven school, I corrected. As I continued my inspection, workers began approaching me with observations. Small things, a slight delay in a pneumatic response, a new squeak in the conveyor, a smell that wasn't quite right, things that would never make it into an app but could prevent disasters if caught early. By lunch, the plant was running at 90% capacity. By the end of the week, we'd be back to full production. But more importantly, the culture had shifted. People weren't afraid to report problems anymore. They weren't worried about being labeled negative or resistant to change. Jonathan made good on his promise. My clipboard, the original, stained one, now sat in a climate-controlled display case in the corporate boardroom. The plaque beneath it read, "Excellence is not disruption. Excellence is consistency, properly applied." This checklist prevented 6,400 days of accidents until it was discarded, recovered from waste bin during crisis response. A reminder that wisdom sometimes comes on crumpled paper. The media coverage was brutal but brief. Emoji disaster made headlines for a week. Blake's name became a cautionary tale in business schools. Workpink's stock crashed 40% before recovering. They quietly pivoted to human-assisted monitoring solutions, which meant adding a checklist feature to their app. 3 months later, I received a package, no return address, but I recognized Blake's handwriting. Inside was a new clipboard, expensive, leather-bound, custom-made. The note said simply, "You were right. B." I donated it to charity and kept using my steel one. The victory wasn't in Blake's humiliation or even in my promotion. It was in the small things. The way new employees were now trained to trust their senses first, technology second. The way the morning inspection had become a ritual again, not a chore. The way other plants started requesting copies of our outdated safety protocols. Stevens and his innovation team were replaced by people who understood that in manufacturing, boring is good. Boring means predictable. Predictable means safe. Safe means everyone goes home. One afternoon, 6 months after the incident, Jonathan visited the floor. He found me training a new supervisor, walking her through the checklist line by line. "Every item has a story," I explained to her. "This one about hydraulic pressure, added in 1987 after a cylinder exploded. This one about temperature variance, 1993, thermal expansion caused a shaft to seize. This isn't just a checklist, it's decades of learned experience." Jonathan watched silently, then said, "You know what the board calls you now? The woman who saved Alderaan. They wanted to give you a corporate position, VP of Safety Innovation." "And?" I asked, though I already knew my answer. "I told them you'd refuse, that you belong here, on the floor, where the real work happens." He was right. My revenge wasn't about climbing the corporate ladder or getting Blake fired. It was about proving that expertise matters, that experience has value, and that sometimes the best technology is a clipboard and common sense. As Jonathan left, the new supervisor asked, "Is it true? Did you really let the pipe explode to prove a point?" I looked at her, then at the factory floor where hundreds of workers trusted our systems to keep them safe. "I didn't let anything happen. I followed the protocols exactly as management required. The pipe exploded because someone thought innovation was more important than information. But you knew it would fail." "I knew physics doesn't care about your app reviews," I said. "Pressure is pressure, metal fatigue is metal fatigue, and gravity always wins." She absorbed this, then asked, "What happened to the manager? Blake?" Last I heard, he was consulting for a cryptocurrency startup, something about disrupting traditional banking. We both looked at each other, and for the first time since the incident, I actually laughed. Some people never learn. As I walked the floor that afternoon, clipboard in hand, checking items off my list, I thought about the phrase Jonathan had put on that plaque. Excellence is consistency, properly applied. But I preferred my own version. The best revenge isn't watching someone fail. It's being too busy maintaining excellence to notice when they do. The factory hummed around me, steady, predictable, safe. Every sound in its place, every vibration accounted for, every worker protected by procedures written in experience rather than code. My checklist was complete. Time to start again tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate revenge and want to hear more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And hey, what did you think about Alexis's approach? Would you have let the disaster happen, or would you have intervened? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one.